Hello, welcome to another episode of Somewhere Between a TV and Film podcast. I am your host, Daniel Para, and it is so nice to be back. We have chosen to bring the show back. Admittedly, we took a long break. It wasn't on purpose that we decided to cancel any of the show or decided to stop it. We just admittedly got busy with life and things just took course in that way. Admittedly, we've tried to bring it back multiple times, and finally, we have found a way to do it, even though we might not be able to be together every single episode. So, in between our big ones, one that'll be Erwin and myself, what we'll do is if either of us can watch something, then we will review it in a laid back way. Like currently leaving the theater right now. I just saw Madam Web, and that is what we'll be discussing today. Or if he does do this as well and I can't see it, then he will have his reviews. These will basically be our mini episodes in between. And if you're not familiar with our show, number one, thank you so much for watching. We did take a long break, but I did notice that people were still discovering the show and watching it. And that makes us feel really good every time we see that. We've noticed that people do enjoy it. They tell us this. And it was really something was missing whenever we weren't doing it. And I'm excited to bring it back. The movie that we're kicking off, admittedly, is Madam Web. And I want to preface this by saying we love superhero movies. I love superhero movies a lot. I find them to be modern day Greek mythology, essentially. They are what people talk about myths, legends, folklore, everything, but through American cinema and comic books. And I'm a huge fan of Spider Man. The past few superhero movies, I understand that the current state of superhero movies, the MCU, the DCEU, is over. Let me explain this by saying that I am easy on superhero movies. I would say we admittedly haven't done anything since Black Panther Wakanda Forever, I believe. But if I were to go over the past few superhero movies, for example, I would say Spider Verse. Loved, of course, adored it. There was Aquaman, not a fan. The Marvels, I actually really enjoyed. I thought there were some huge issues with it for sure, but I thought that it had a lot of great stuff going for it. Iman Vellani is incredible in it. Brie Larson, and admittedly, I do not remember the actress's name off the top of my head, but the one who plays Monica Rambeau, I think, is great too. There are some issues with that movie, but I am a fan of it. Loki season 2 is incredible. And then there are the Sony movies. The last one being, I believe, Morbius, and before that was Venom, Let There Be Carnage. Venom has its place with people. People enjoy those two. I tolerate them, I suppose. I'm not a fan of them necessarily, but I don't have any ill will against them. The second one, I think, has these really odd, even production issue criticisms that I'll honestly get even more into with Madam Web. All of this is to say, I am a huge superhero fan, and not everything is going to be perfect. Not everything's going to hit perfectly. Morbius has been a talk to death. And did I enjoy it? No. Did I hate it? Yes. Did I find enjoyment out of it, though? For sure. Was it more boring than it was anything else, though? Absolutely. Sony has this tendency to go with this kind of sterile, science based approach for their superhero movies, and it doesn't really make any sense to me. I'm a defender of The Amazing Spider Man 2. I do like that movie. Does it get really hampered down by the science stuff for whatever reason? Absolutely. I don't need the explanation for Peter Parker's parents that they're spies. And I understand this is something that happens in the comic books. A lot of things happen in the comic books, though. It's all up to interpretation, adaptation. I am totally willing for different things to be accepted within comic book continuity, within the movies, what they change, what they don't. It's just all about execution. Morbius, lay it out like this: it is a vampire movie. That's a cool concept by itself, but do they do anything with it? No, not entirely. They kind of do absolutely nothing with it. And there could be something there about a character study, for example, about somebody tortured by their powers or by the idea of like vampires alone, that they need to feast off of human blood, and the idea that he was a doctor could contrast, I believe. I think that there are ideas there in place. So with Madam Web, there has been a lot of talk about this movie. It is currently sitting, the last time I checked, I believe, at like 14% on Rotten Tomatoes or something like that. And of course, you go in with your own criticisms. You're open to liking something. I like the Batman v Superman Ultimate cut. I love that movie actually. And the theatrical version is currently sitting at, I believe, 28, 29% on Rotten Tomatoes right now. The first Suicide Squad, despite the second one being a million times better, I don't mind either. So this is all leading me up to say, if you were to see Madam Web and go in with the hope of enjoying it, I hope that you can. I hope that you can get absolutely anything out of it that you would consider you liking the movie. So, with all that being said, did I like this? No, not at all. Did I hate it? Yes, a fair amount, actually. Did I think it was a disaster? Yes, I did also think that. Did I also get some form of enjoyment out of it? I did, because parts of it are ridiculous and stupid and really, really, really poorly done. I actually cannot believe, and I'm going to explain this by saying that I don't think that this has anything to do with the people. Honestly, I can't even give credit to the writers. I've seen what they've written. They've written Gods of Egypt and Morbius, and I do actually like that Power Rangers movie. That movie is good. But everything else, I don't know how people manage to keep successfully getting work within the Hollywood system when they have consistently produced work that is like this. I am actually kind of astounded that a movie like this exists in 2024. The movie itself is kind of a period piece in 2003, and this is the closest spiritual successor in every kind of way to Catwoman with Halle Berry to me. It has the exact same oddity issues in it. There's a very simple filmmaking rule, the 180-degree rule, that sets up the orientation so you know where characters are within a scene. Sometimes it's broken, like the Safdies do in Uncut Gems, or it's used multiple times to indicate stress and anxiety in the TV show The Bear. Here, it is used, but I don't believe that it's used for that purpose. I believe that it was just kind of really, really slapdash put together and edited. And there's so many questionable things that are in this movie that make absolutely no sense to me as to how they can exist. I've seen multiple unsolicited clips of Dakota Johnson's performance in this movie, and I don't love looking at clips just by themselves because sometimes you need more context, sometimes you need to know. And I have seen interviews with Dakota Johnson that makes it seem like she really doesn't want to be there. That is omitted within this movie as well. And sometimes people call her a bad actress, and I have seen the 50 Shades of Grey movies, but I wouldn't blame that on her either, because I've also seen A Bigger Splash, and I've seen Suspiria. Suspiria is, like, to me, one of the best horror movies ever made, both versions, including the remake, and she is phenomenal in that. So what's happening here, I have no idea, and I don't know if it's just because they were like, all right, we need to get this done. We need to make any kind of profit off of this franchise that we can because we can't use Spider-Man anymore. So we'll use the spin-off characters like I know that Bad Bunny was supposed to be El Muerto at one point, and that got canceled. I would have liked to see that, but I also notice in these interviews that these actresses talk about this movie like it's part of the MCU, and it makes me wonder who exactly is telling them what, because if they're lied to, then that's strange. And that's more of an indication of how Sony operates as a studio. But we know this because of all of the behind the scenes issues that happens with Spider-Man 3 and happens with The Amazing Spider-Man, The Amazing Spider-Man 2, and with both Venom movies and with Morbius. The fact that Spider-Man is at the end of, I believe it's Venom, Let There Be Carnage, and then that goes nowhere, tells you that the MCU really does not want to associate with this. This, to me, was the most, it was a period piece in 2003, like I said, and it felt like it. But it felt like it was transported from there. The effects feel transported from there. I've never seen something in the past, maybe since, I would say, honestly, Fantastic Four from 2015 looks so unabashedly ugly. It was astoundingly bad. I thought that a lot of it reminded me of, and I do enjoy the first couple seasons of some of the CW shows, like The Flash. I loved up until it kind of lost me. But there are moments in it, and I understand that the woman who directed this is a TV director, and I don't think it had anything to do with her or anything. I just felt like it was just so put together at the last second. There are moments, like I said, with the 180-degree rule where it's just completely like, where is anybody? The editing is insane. There are crash zooms for no reason at like no particular point. There's a moment at the beginning, and I will say, I didn't want to go into this hating it. I heard that some people did want to do that, and I was like, well, if I can get anything out of it, maybe there are some decent things to say. And there is one moment I would say is decent, and it's this sort of timed action scene to Britney Spears' Toxic. I thought that idea was great. But there's a difference to me between good ideas and good execution. So some of the moments in this have been compared to Final Destination. It did remind me of Final Destination. But then it also taught me, because I love those movies, I do. Even some of the lesser ones I have a soft spot for. It taught me that those movies are really well edited. And you cannot recreate that sensation if you don't know how to build on your own editing. The actresses are fine. Isabella Merced and Sydney Sweeney, and I unfortunately do not remember the third girl's name, all seem like they are trying. They want to be there, but they're also given the suits for, I would say, 30 seconds in this movie. It made absolutely no sense to me. If they want to go ahead and do the thing where characters earn their powers, that's fine. But they don't even do that in this movie. Dakota Johnson is the only one with it, and they just hint that this is where this is going in the future. But I don't understand. Are they trying to set up a sequel? Are they trying to do a second one? If so, this is the most clumsily set up universe I could possibly think of. This is the type of movie that does have lines that reference Spider-Man constantly. There's tons of variations of the with great power comes great responsibility line in this. There's a moment where it's the big thing of the movie, and Dakota Johnson is told something along the lines of, with great responsibility must also come great power, but the way it is delivered is obnoxious. It's just so kind of in your face. And honestly, I admittedly do fall for in your face fan service sometimes, but I think there also has to be the added making a good movie part of it. And for example, I actually kind of enjoyed The Flash. Did it have some massive issues? Yes, absolutely it did. But outside of the fan service stuff in that movie, which I thought was genuinely terrible, I liked that movie. It had enough going for it that I didn't mind watching it. This has nothing going for it. And the first 15 to 20 minutes, I did think it was odd. It was weirdly edited, structured. It was already kind of ugly, but it seemed inoffensive, is what it seemed like to me. Sometimes people have this really hyperbolic urge to say something is one of the worst things ever. Do I think this is one of the worst movies ever made? No. With a question mark at the end of that. Do I think it is one of the worst superhero movies ever made? Yes, I do. I really do. Is it one of the worst studio movies ever made? Yes, because there has been worse movies, of course. There absolutely have been. But this was so nothing and it doesn't make any sense as to why it exists. And movies don't have to justify themselves to exist. But I don't understand the reason for this, especially with Sony, because Sony seems so questionably questionable in how they move that it doesn't make any sense to me. Morbius was bad. It was really bad. The action scenes were bad. Parts of it were funny. Matt Smith seemed like he knew the disaster he was going to be in. Here, I'm not really sure what was happening here. Is it worse? But like than Morbius? Yes. Would I see it quicker? Like would I see it again over Morbius? Absolutely, because this movie's existence doesn't make any sense to me. Sometimes people say, who is this movie for? What is this doing? And I had this question. I saw it at 2:50 p.m. on a Monday right now, and there were maybe three other people in there, and no one stayed to see if there was any kind of after credit scene. I don't know if that's an indicator whether or not anybody in that theater enjoyed it. I certainly did not. The action specifically, I don't mind superhero movies that choose the path of not having tons of action scenes. That can work. It can. And I do want to see different types of superhero movies. I think if the medium is going to go forward and stay fresh and stay original, they're going to have to change things. It's kind of why the atmosphere of superhero movies and blockbusters is the way it is now. Another thing is the way that blockbusters look. Some of that needs to be changed, some DPs, some lighting. I think from a technical standpoint, some of that needs to be worked on again. I do understand that VFX workers have been incredibly overworked recently within the system, and I think that does need to be changed. However, here feels like not even addressing that yet. This feels like it was set back literally 20 years, all the way back to 2003. It looks like those CG like rooftops that are in Catwoman. That movie consistently comes across my mind because that movie's hilarious. Is it bad? Absolutely. And this one really, really reminds me of that movie because I do kind of enjoy that on a level. Is it one of the worst movies ever made? Yes, that one is. And this, especially the third act, I thought for most of it, I was just kind of like, this is bad. I went from sort of being like, this is kind of whatever to being like, okay, this is bad and sort of nothing in a kind of 2004, 2005 Electra way to the third act, completely changing my mind and really making me realize that this movie is awful. It is really nothing to write home about. I cannot believe some of the effect that they've gotten away with here. And the actor who plays the villain, was confusing because I do not know how the ADR specifically that was given to him was accepted. Some genuinely, I there are moments in this movie where he talks and there is nothing matching what his lips are saying. Sometimes his lips don't even move. And the dialogue is still there. It is absolutely wild to me that that somehow passed through anybody. This is a major studio production. And usually I try and see the upside in anything in any of these superhero movies, in any studio movie that could be perceived. I want to be positive. I don't ever want to go into a movie and think, I want this to be bad. I don't want to like trash on everything just to trash on it. But this was ridiculously awful. And it was just fascinating to me that this exists. However, parts of it are very funny, not in the way that you might want them to be. There were a couple of jokes that I thought worked, and there was the one action scene idea that I thought was worth something up until the action actually starts happening, and then you can't see a single thing that's happening in it. But genuinely, I think I'd be nicer about this if Sony didn't have such a habit of fucking over every single creative that they work with, but they do. And the Spider-Verse movies are 1 in a million. I think they let them do that because they don't want to interfere because they know they have something there. And then there's the Spider-Man MCU stuff, which I love and I think is incredible and is really well done. And that definitely makes them money. So I don't really understand what their reasoning is for making these. And yet the irony of this all is I don't even think that Craven looks that bad. I thought that looked like something interesting. How will it be? I don't know. Venom, I didn't love. I tolerated Venom 2. I tolerated a little bit less, but I would say wasn't that movie didn't look bad. Morbius was awful, and this is somehow even worse. They're just sort of on a steady decline. I think it was the last minute of this movie in particular where I was just kind of baffled that this was real, I suppose. And it sets up all of this stuff all of a sudden at the very end that Sony does have this habit of misleading trailers, and I actually don't mind that all the time. But the Spider Women idea is not in this movie. They are in those suits, I would say, for about a minute total. And those visions that they show, of course, are at the very end. And of course, they do this where we've talked about this too on our show that The Amazing Spider Man 2 had so much footage shown from that movie. I remember hearing from a different show, maybe an article somewhere, that they had 45 minutes of promotional material or something like that. But I don't get it. Stop doing that. I don't mind trailers that don't show everything, but that's misleading. And Sony just continues to do stuff like this, and it bothers me. And I can't really quite blame anyone for this movie outside of the studio, I suppose. But this movie is awful. It is very bad. If you would like to have any form of entertainment out of it, I do recommend it as one of those movies that you see at home with friends that you can kind of talk over and then like wait for ridiculous things to happen because there are plenty of them. And it does have those moments that are really funny. But I would not recommend seeing this in a theater. I would not recommend that at all. And honestly, that would probably be the end of my review. We do a 1 out of 5 rating system here. And I gave my score away. I'm sorry. That was intrusive thinking. Out of 5 is how we review things. And I would give this a 1 out of 5. I got ahead of myself there. But on the upside, guys, I am so excited we're back. we have chosen to make Dune 2 our big one where both of us will be returning. Erwin kind of refused to see Madam Web, so we couldn't review it together. And honestly, he is not missing out on anything. But we are so excited that'll be our first big episode back. Just think of this as kind of a prelude to that. And I'm sorry it was so negative. I was hoping that I could have some kind of enjoyment out of it, and I definitely did, but maybe not in the way that is intended. Anyway, we are so excited to be back, everybody. And if you could give us your honest rating on Apple, Spotify, it helps us out so much. Leave a review, just any rating, really. You can be honest if you hate the show, that's okay too. So, thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next time for Dune Chapter 2.